about this. You've also launched out from your original project and now are working in New York State, Massachusetts, Alabama, and I think eventually a national and even international rollout is also on the plan. So thank you very much for joining us today, both of you. And Jennifer, would you like to go ahead with what
Sure.
you want to tell us?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ulrika, and thank you for having us. I agree. I wish we could be in person. It's so much more fun to be able to engage and show each other around in that way. But I trust we'll be able to travel again in the next couple of years, I hope. So thank you so much for having me. I'm going to provide an overview of Hearken. There's so much more to say on any given slide that I'm on. So please, write down your questions and we'll get to as many as possible. So I'm going to go somewhat fast. If I'm speaking too quickly, just let me know because I have a habit of doing that. So hearken, the word itself, you might have seen, means to listen and to give respectful attention. And so our goal is to help organizations, be they media organizations, city government, for-profit businesses, nonprofit, does not matter, is to help them better listen and serve the communities and their stakeholders. And so we are, as Ulrike said, we're on the forefront of some of this work in terms of listening and engagement. And we're really focused on helping to build communities that sustain organizations so that are paying or providing value in some way, shape, or form. And so we do consulting and we have technology, and I'll share a little bit of both of those things as we go through. So quick update. We've been in 250 organizations since we were founded 5 years ago across 90 countries. We powered a number of different organizations, including these. And really what we are focused on is flipping the traditional approach. So I'll explain this picture real quick, but this is how most media companies, most institutions actually operate, is where the institution is elevated above the public it's serving. And it's taking a position of authority saying, here's what we think you need to know. We're the experts. You're here to listen. And the public is really seen as, abstractly. So maybe their data or their dollar signs or their demographics, but they're not treated as individuals. They're kind of an amorphous audience, so to speak. And this approach positions the news organization as the parent, saying, you can't know what you need to know. I know what's best for you, so let me tell you. And it's really focused on telling and not actually listening. So the approach that we've been developing and helping newsrooms enact around the world for the last 5+ years is what we call a public powered approach. And what it is you can see here, is elevating the public, treating them as individuals, and not starting from a place of assertion and saying, here's what you need to know, but instead starting from a place of curiosity, saying, what do you not know that we can understand or find out? So this positions the newsroom as a servant, saying the public is smart enough to know what information needs they have, and we are going to open ourselves up to directly hear those so that we can be as relevant and useful as possible, which also leads to sustainability. And so this is a listening first approach versus a telling first approach. And what we found throughout all of these experiments we've been running is that this approach ensures adoption in terms of people being more loyal, coming back to the news organization because they have a stake. They are able to shape the content and matter in some way. It actually creates better systems and content that's born out of need versus someone's editorial instincts, which, they might not be bad or wrong, but most newsrooms do not reflect society at large in terms of the demographics and the lived experience. So by enabling people to come to the table with their ideas and their questions, you start to serve more people than you did before. And then it creates this iterative process because you're always listening. And so your organization can evolve as the public evolves. You don't have to have these big changes every 5 years, trying to catch up with how the world has changed. And we know right now the world is changing faster than it ever has, really, with so many different factors in play. And then importantly, this is really important in the US. I know Germany has more trust in the news publications than US citizens do in our news publications, but it does establish a foundation of trust to have this mutualistic relationship. And so speaking of mutualistic relationships, we call engagement, we think about it in the same way that we use that term outside of journalism, which is for marriage. When you get engaged, it's about a mutually beneficial relationship and about a supportive feedback loop. And so I'll take you through this real quick, but on the upper left and with purple is what a lot of newsrooms do. They invite some feedback from the public, and then the public gives feedback. Might be 10 pieces of feedback or it might be 10,000, doesn't matter. And a lot of times that's where engagement stops, is with counting, what number of feedback or insights that you got, but not actually doing anything with it. And so we joke that if you stop at that point, you just ask for something, you get it, but you don't actually do anything with it or tell people how you've used it, then you're being a quote unquote ask hole. So sorry, we love puns. But this is something that's really important, is making sure that once you receive that gift of insight from the public, is that you actually use it. So the yellow is showing that the newsroom is actually responding to what they're hearing, and then that they're showing that they're listening. So this might be featuring people who ask questions or who are shaping the reporting, crediting them, showing back to the public that you're engaging with them and that people just like them can get involved as well. And so I won't go through this whole slide, but this kind of relates to the talk that I gave in Berlin. And I wish I had the slide back then. Things kind of come to you when they do. But I really think about engagement in kind of three different buckets. There's extractive on the left, transactional in the middle, and relational on the right. Now, extractive on the left, I would argue, is never good to do. It's really designed to only benefit the asker. So in this case, the news organization. And it doesn't leave the person who is participating any better off than they were before. It essentially consolidates power in the place that already has power. In the center here, transactional, this is where there's an exchange. It's a mutual exchange where the news organization gives context for why they want to engage. There's aligned incentives, everything's clear. It doesn't necessarily say there's going to be a longer term relationship, but everyone's upfront about kind of what the situation is. And that's just a simple power exchange. Now, on the right in yellow is relational engagement. And this is where I think things get very exciting. It's because this is where innovation happens, when the public is able to actually shape and change, not from a limited menu of what the newsroom wants to offer, saying pick A, B, or C, but when the newsroom is open to listening more broadly and hearing patterns and starting to change based on what they're hearing back. So this is the approach that allows for power growing instead of just hoarding or exchange, and possibility growing. So this is where a lot of innovation can take place, is when you open yourself up for even more potential evolution. And so what we've learned overall is that the more your audience feels heard and the more that they can see that you're serving them, then the more likely they are to trust and pay you. And regardless of how stable some news climates are in different countries, some of these trends are just pervasive. And so we really find it important to have this foundation of trust and mutual, reciprocity for all newsrooms. They can benefit. And so I want to just give you a few examples here. But what we found from our data and everything is that engagement is highest in times of need, right? So COVID, for example, we've seen the most engagement ever on our platform across every country. Is newsrooms really playing a part in being a critical piece of infrastructure, telling people what the new rules are, where there's danger, being a spot where people can go to get the latest information. So we are really excited that our newsrooms that have been with us for a while have been able to use the same process and use the technology to gather really great insights and be the most responsive news organizations in their market. And so on the right, as an example, the Seattle Times, a big newspaper, is using our embeds in very interesting ways, including gathering obituaries for people who have died from COVID because they don't have enough reporters to cover all of the people who have passed. And then our partners in Los Angeles have done this incredible, it's 30,000 words story that has every question that people have asked answered. So it's this great repository, super helpful. Again, just answering people's questions. And so the case for listening and collecting questions from the public is that in the immediate, it surfaces great new ideas, new sources for stories. It provides critical information for more than, the core people that you're serving. And before you do the reporting, before you spend the money and time, you are validating that this story matters to people. So you don't have to wait for the metrics to come in to say, oh, is this relevant? You know before you even do it that people need it. So that's really useful in terms of cost savings. Now, in the future, what it means is that you create deeper relationships. You create more opportunities to convert people who are more casual readers or listeners or watchers into paying customers and loyal, advocates for the brand. And then you're building that trust and that foundation for a longer term relationship. What we found overall is that the metrics follow when you listen to your stakeholders. And so just as a quick example of kind of how we think about it, on the left is a traditional funnel, for how stakeholders or how the audience gets closer to the news organization. And there's these, traditional phases where people are aware and then they engage a little bit, then they convert, and then they're retained. Where we think the most opportunity is and the most exciting places to supercharge the funnel is on the right-hand side. And this is flipping it. So it's about how the organization gets closer to stakeholders first. And in order to do that, what we found and why we've gone into consulting is that there's a mindset shift that's needed. There's a mentality shift that reporters need to go through to start looking to the public as a partner instead of a consumer. And with that, they need to, A, be open to the idea. They need to have successful new experiences in which the public does play a different role in shaping the reporting. And then the news organization and the journalist starts to become an evangelist for this method because their stories are performing better. They're getting scoops. They're doing really interesting work. They're feeling empowered by working with the public in this way. And then eventually this becomes just how you report, which we've seen in a couple of our news organizations that have really committed to this approach. And we find, and I won't go through all of this, but I'll share the deck with you, is that every part of the funnel gets better, gets more successful when you start by treating the public as a co-creator and a partner instead of just a consumer or a marketer or distributor or the other ways that you can look at the public. So we found, for instance, that when people are given the opportunity to ask a question, 54% of the time they will opt into a newsletter, which is way higher than if there's just a pop-up or some other way of trying to get more people to opt in. We also find that content performs better, and this is true for so many of our partners. Most of our partners have reported back to us that their stories that are created through this approach result in much more consumption of that content. So in this case, a partner of ours in San Francisco gets 11 to 15 times more page views on every story they do with this approach. And then we also find that this approach is more often part of the path from someone to go from a casual observer or reader into an actual supporter, subscribing, paying, being part of that news organization. And so I wanted to give a quick case study here too. This is our partner. We work in Denmark. We opened an office there a little over a year ago in Copenhagen and Odense. And we have actually a German-speaking executive director there. So I can always connect you to Morten Andersen, who spent a lot of time in Germany. But we're working with a ton of different Danish media outlets, and they're just doing such brilliant work and showing the case for this approach. So one of our partners, TV2, in the island of Funen, they started to use Hearken right when coronavirus hit. And just in the first 3 weeks, they got more than 400 questions, published more than 50 stories in this approach, which yielded a 32% increase in average reading time and 109% increase compared to normal reading time. And what they found, they went back to the audience to do a survey to try and understand what the effect has been in doing this new approach and really rolling it out across the newsroom. And we're still getting data back, but the first 100 survey responses actually came in last week. And it showed that 62% of viewers think the project improves relevance and coverage. 60% feel the newsroom is now more accessible. 64% think it's improved the newsroom's positive role in the community. Half of them would say they're likely to ask a question another time, so re-engage. And only a very small percentage, 11%, worry that answers have taken focus from more important coverage. So people have great questions. They're not asking for cat videos or silly things. They have really, really good ideas that become stories. And so a final note here, and this is something we're seeing in America, and I just wanted to share with you in case it's something that you're noticing as well, is that, we're having a real reckoning right now in our country around a long legacy of suppression of non-white voices and of people of color. And we're having a lot of hard conversations that are very necessary in newsrooms, in friend groups, and culture overall. And white supremacy as an overall topic has come up more and more. And what we're seeing is that breaking news culture can reinforce some of the aspects of white supremacy culture. And I just leave you with this as something to think about as you're imagining how your newsroom can serve everyone in your community and what some of the norms are that might not be the norms for other cultures, and what are ways that you can be inviting to people who maybe come from a different background or who are looking to serve the community in different ways. So these are just a few of the white supremacy culture hallmarks, that also are evident in newsrooms. So a sense of urgency, quantity over quality, do as many stories as possible. The paternalistic attitude of, we know what's best for you. So power hoarding, I mentioned the kind of extractive engagement, and then progress is bigger or more. Instead of doing fewer stories that give more context. And we've had a lot of partners who have decided to scale back on the number of stories they're doing and do deeper stories, and their numbers are going way up. They're seeing that quality is really important. And then the notion of objectivity, which I won't go into right now. It's a whole other topic. But I just wanted to share that with you in case it's useful as you're trying to make sure your newsroom can cover more diverse cities, more diverse communities, and really grow with the way a lot of the world is growing. So that was a lot. I will jump out now, but feel free to reach out to me. And we also have partners in Denmark who are German speakers and would love to connect.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was very insightful. I would suggest we stick with the plan and switch right over to Max and then discuss both approaches at the same time. So here's to you, Max.
Thanks, everybody. Let me share my screen here. I wanted to give a huge shout out to Jennifer and everything that Harken has been doing for the last 5 years. It's the reason why I got involved in, one of the reasons why I got involved in doing local journalism and going to journalism school in the first place. So huge shout out to everything that you set the groundwork for. So hi, I'm Max. I'm the lead for media and journalism for the Local Voices Network in Cortico. Cortico is a nonprofit technology company that develops and operates the Local Voices Network. We came out of the Lab for Social Machines at the MIT Media Lab, and the Lab for Social Machines is one of our ongoing research partners for both Cortico and the Local Voices Network. So we're seeking with LVN to create a new space for public conversations that give voice and space for folks who are more frequently underheard in their communities. LVN's mission is to foster constructive public conversations in communities and in the media that improves our understanding of one another. We're, key to achieving this mission is, surfacing underheard voices, folks who are, normally not able to attend public meetings or who are left out of civic processes and decision-making processes most frequently. We host conversations where people are listening and learning across boundaries, and work with local news partners to elevate and amplify stories through different media channels.
Hey, Max.
Yes.
Max, I just want to let you know, I think you're not in screen share full mode yet. So we're seeing like the slides on the side. So if you press play up at the top, then you're good.
Is it going now, or is it still?
No, Max, unfortunately not. Did you choose desktop sharing? Yeah, that would be all right as well. Because sometimes we have troubles with, if you are not in desktop share, if you choose the application, and sometimes it's not getting like a full screen.
Ah, got it. Okay. Let me stop and restart then. Thanks for letting me know.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, let me do this one more time. Let me do screen number 1. Okay. How about now?
Perfect.
Hey, all right, cool. So, as I was saying, at the heart of LVN are these facilitated small group conversations, combined with new technology to connect conversations across space and time to create a conversation network. The Cortico and MIT team is developing technology platform powered by state-of-the-art AI, machine learning, and data visualization algorithms that we can use to scale LVN to be a more nationwide network. In non-COVID times, people gather together around a custom piece of hardware that we built out called the Digital Hearth, which is used to record and process speech recordings and to play back excerpts from previous conversations. Here's what it looks like in practice. The Digital Hearth is designed to create an inviting atmosphere for conversations. It sits on the center of the table and has a remote that can be used by the facilitator of the conversations. Each Local Voices Network conversation is led with values. Participants drive the conversation. This is not a focus group. It's not an opportunity to ask a specific set of questions to folks at the table, but it's an opportunity for people to share with each other what is most important to them locally within their communities. The conversations are rooted in experience over opinion. So folks are talking about the experiences that they've had locally in their lives that lead them to the opinions that they share, which we found has been a way to decrease polarization within conversations and to be able to provide people with a sense of connection to other folks who are in their local communities. The conversations engage discomfort. They're intentionally a space for people to talk about some of the more difficult topics that arise in local issues. So everything from school rezoning to food access. These conversations are a space for people to address some of these more uncomfortable topics. And they're a space to be able to connect within and across groups. So they're not, these conversations are not interviews led by an expert who knows what the questions are. They're often open-ended conversations where the participants have room to shape and drive the conversation. Cortico has created a conversation analytics platform for search and discovery across these conversations. So LVN members, these are conversation hosts and participants, can use the conversation platform to find highlights for cross-pollination, to share stories from other groups, and local media partners can explore patterns across the conversation and find story highlights, personal experiences, stories, themes that they can amplify and include in local media. One of our first news partners is the Cap Times in Madison, Wisconsin, and they've run a series of stories that embed quotes with audio from LVN conversations, and have produced podcasts that are building off of these conversations. So LVN is by and large a much newer and younger organization. We're just about over a year old, and right around our first anniversary was when COVID-19 struck. So our whole project and process of getting people together for in-person conversation has switched over to Zoom. And it's created an opportunity for people who might not physically have been able to ever get in the room at the same time to be able to connect across groups. This is a poster for a conversation that we hosted just last week with one of our community partners in Chicago. Like Jennifer mentioned, COVID-19 has created this crucible of an opportunity for people to be able to come together and address topics that are of utmost importance for thinking about what reopening looks like, and also addressing gaps in information and resources that folks have locally within their communities. We also work with city agencies, with library systems, to gather groups of people in communities and in neighborhoods across the country to talk about what's most important to them in their communities as they're thinking about and getting ready to reopen. I can do a more in-depth demo, but that was my kind of quick and dirty overview of what LVN is and does. And I can stop sharing my screen for a second. Ulrike, I think you're muted.
Yeah. Are you done, Max?
Yeah, that's my quick and dirty 5 minute LVN.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you to both of you. And I would say, can we go to panel view that we see all of our participants? Jennifer? Because otherwise, it'll be difficult for me to see who's raising their hand. You have to unmute yourself, Jennifer.
Yeah, no, I have a little trouble at the moment with my technique. You can open the participant list when next left to the end button, and then you can see, but nobody has lift
got
their
it.
hand yet. So if you have questions, please, you're welcome to ask your questions right now. We want to get into a discussion with you. And yes.
You do not have to write them into a chat window. Just raise your hand, use the hand button, which is on the lower bar. And until we got that going, I have a question. So from what I gathered from your presentations is that Harken works really well for publishers that have already established a pattern of trust and audience engagement, and now in this times of crisis can tap into this. Whereas Local Voices Network seems like something that works very well at short notice, because publishers can tap into the database that you already have and do not need a report that they needed to have built with their audience for 3 months or 6 months or however long that takes to engage trust. Is that a statement you would agree with?
Yeah, I mean, on our end with Harken, definitely we work with a lot of established brands and organizations that already have stakeholders and in which they want to have a more two-way relationship with them. We also work with new organizations and new initiatives that are looking to get started. And we do something that's not quite the same as what Cortico does, but is called diagnostic listening. And it's really in-depth empathy interviews with stakeholders to start to see some of the patterns that are coming out, and then to start to design engagement for the specific audiences you're hoping to attract. So we work at kind of both ends of the spectrum. We don't have the amazing technology that Cortico has for the listening to those conversations with community members. But yeah, Max, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that synopsis.
Yeah, I think one of the only thing that I would add to that is that the Local Voices Network conversations are really intended to be an opportunity for community members to connect with each other and to mutually create meaning and identify where there's gaps in information or resources, or when people who are at the same table, whether it's in person or digitally, have answers to questions that other folks within the community have. Frequently, what we've noticed is that after a conversation, people will realize that there's already a couple of organizations or projects that are in the works within their local communities that they can tap into that they might not have heard about otherwise. And it's an opportunity also for reporters who are participating in the conversations to be able to hear from folks where there's points of disagreement or tension, or when people are in agreement. It's sometimes a little bit trickier to get a sense of that online, where people are actually finding themselves at odds. But in person and in real time, it's a little bit of a slower process. But we have the conversations are intended to be a space for people to be able to come together and address where there's friction and where there's congruence.
Do you actively encourage publishers or news media organizations to take part in the discussions and maybe facilitate them, and not just extract value after the fact?
Absolutely, yeah, and that's a newer thing for us. When we were starting out, we had kind of this like church and state bifurcation between whether it was community organizations or community volunteers who would host the conversations. But more recently, especially as news organizations are looking to conduct community events and online community engagement, we've encouraged in our training reporters to think of themselves and to think of their role as audience conveners, and to host, whether it's town halls or one-off conversations with groups of folks that are parents of students with special needs, with people who are DACA recipients, or generally with people within a neighborhood, to address what topics are of immediate need and importance for information, whether it's access to food and shelter, questions about rent and landlords, and longer term questions similar to I want to give a shout out to the People's Agenda, Citizens Agenda work that Harken is working on, where people's hopes and concerns can be taken into account when reporters are thinking about upcoming interviews with folks who are running for local elections or for more national elections.
Okay, Joshua?
Yes, exactly. And also, we could just let you know after Joshua, Sabine also has a question, but the hand rise button doesn't work with her.
Okay,
So
first Joshua, then Sabine.
Yeah, hi.
Exactly.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes?
Yes, we can.
So my question is concerning Harken. Like how, I can't imagine how it technically works. Like, is it an embed, which I put in an article, or how does it work to ask my questions as a reader?
Yeah, that's great. I can actually screen share to show you. That's probably easiest here. So let me show you an example. Just increase the screen size. So if I'm a reader on a story, here's an example of our partners in the San Francisco Bay Area. They have a series called Bay Curious that's sponsored. We also find too that sponsors really love paying a premium to be involved in these community-based projects. But here's an example of our embeds here. I'll just kind of make the screen a little bigger. So they're asking what question, what do you wonder about the Bay Area, its culture or people that you want Bay Curious to investigate? So I'll type, my question here, and then I can add name, email, phone number if I'd like. I can sign up for a newsletter. I can be anonymous. We're also compliant with all Privacy Shield and GDPR and CCPA and all of that fun stuff. So we have all of those things that people will opt into too, so that your data is safe and everyone is, above board there. And then on the right here is an example of a voting round. So these are questions that the journalists had curated from the group to give people the opportunity to vote on. So I might just vote on this first one here and see how it's doing. Okay, it's in second place. So I can now rally my friends to vote for it too if I really want to know that answer. And I can enter my email address to be alerted if that question ever gets answered as well, and sign up for the newsletter at that point too. So that's, just some examples. The embeds can be they're very customized to the brand. So here's an example too from another partner in California that's, collecting questions about coronavirus, and, they have a very sparsely designed version of it, and they can submit there. And then on the back end, what it looks like, this is just a quick example. This is one of our partners. We work with the BBC across 20 different languages. And here's an example of their user-generated content dashboard. They can see all the activity over the last few weeks, what questions people have had and sort. They can also see where people have asked questions from. And you can export this data to see, who's asking and where to understand better. And I mean, they have a lot of questions, so it gets very granular here. You can see via postal code. And so that's an example of how this works on the back end. And you can create new forms, new polls, new everything, and download that data, et cetera. So here's an example of, what one of these forms can look like. The BBC has additional text about, how they use the data and everything. And it's all really meant to be used for reporters and producers. So there's no technical expertise required, and they can just embed a code, and they can also direct link. So social media, you can just share directly the embed, and it'll be responsive to the tool that you're using. So does that help? That's just kind of like a quick overview.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Okay, okay, thank you. So Sabine is next.
She had the same question, so question was already answered.
Yes, thank you.
Next one is Alexander.
Can I just quickly ask one more thing? So what you were showing, the back end, that is actually the back end that you furnish the customer with.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
So our partners we call it the engagement management system, or the EMS for short. And so part of working with us, if you want the technology as well, is we support your use of that and train people on it and consult around the best use of it. So some newsrooms have 30 different embeds going at once, one for their politics reporter, one for their education, one for a special project, one to get follow-up questions on an ongoing investigation. So there's just tons of different ways to use it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sabine. The next one is Alexander.
Yes, thanks a lot. Well, first of all, thank you both for your presentation. It was really interesting to see what you guys are doing. And the question is, again, for you, Jennifer, apologies, Max, but maybe you can add something to that, because you mentioned it, Jennifer, in your presentation. You said that you were seeing a decrease of numbers or stories published correlating with more reach in the end? Because this is interesting, because this is we tried this with one of our publications in Germany, and it basically failed. I mean, maybe it's because we didn't ask the community, but then here comes the question: is that solely based on picking fewer topics the community raised and giving more in-depth stories about that, or is it like a general observation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we found that so thinking about any industry, let's say the car industry, Germany is known for your amazing automobiles. If you were to user test a lot of the ideas before you put them out to market, you might end up doing less models or fewer models of car, because you've kind of been able to really zone in on what people respond to, what they like, what matters. And so ultimately you can conserve your resources by doing fewer productions, essentially. And what we found with our partners that have done, fewer stories, that have reported better metrics on each of them, is that it's the same thing. They're basically doing longer stories that are built from listening to the community's needs and seeing patterns. So it might be people are having tons of questions about this one thing that they thought they had already covered, but apparently there's still a lot of confusion around. And so that more comprehensive story does way better than a bunch of small stories that they do, because it's coming out of a demonstrated need. So I can't speak for all publishers that have decided to do fewer stories, but I know when they are public powered, they do perform better typically. The other thing that I think is really interesting, and this is more of a philosophical thing, is that there's this moment right now where the news industry obviously was built for speed and efficiency and distribution, get as many things out as fast as possible. And that was good for a world in which there was limited information and you're competing against other people. But in a world where there's so much information, it's not that you want to get out more because people are already over subscribed to the information. You need to be as relevant as possible. And to be as relevant as possible, you need to listen and be as close as possible to understand what the needs are. So we see that optimizing for trust and relationships versus optimizing for speed and efficiency is really useful in terms of the business metrics that flow, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I think it probably is a question also where to fit it in your Hero Hub hygiene content model. And the second question, thanks for that, Max. I don't know if you want to add something. Sorry.
I have nothing to add to that. That sounds spot on.
Okay, cool. And the second one is for both of you probably, because what you're basically suggesting is something that product management is doing for a long time, or UX, lean UX, and all these concepts are basically typically based on user research. Do you have, or do the companies you work with usually have some sort of champion in the company, or some person only taking care of community questions? Because if you are in that feedback loop somehow, you need to, as you said, you had that one slide with the loop that says "Don't be an asshole," basically. And to kind of feed that back, you need to make that visible to your users, that you answered the question or that you have actually published the story. Do you typically have people inside the company that just do that specific thing?
That's a great question. So every organization is a little bit different, but there's kind of two patterns that have emerged where there is that, super evangelist person whose full-time job is to do this, or it's distributed and there are multiple people for whom this is part of their workflow. And I always like that model better because it ensures that the newsroom will always be listening in some way, shape, or form, and that if one person leaves or gets laid off or whatever, you don't lose that entire relationship that you've been building with the community. So, sometimes it does start with just one person proving out the model and getting some of the journalists who might be more skeptical to come along by seeing the results and the success. It just takes a little bit each time. But we have found sometimes if it comes from the top, and the editors or CEOs and whatnot say, we're going to do this because they see the business case, but the reporters haven't bought in yet, that's really hard. So you want to find a reporter or a person who is really excited about it and have their boss also see the logic so that they can run the experiment long enough to show that it works, because it works if you run the experiment. But there's so many demands that it's easy to kind of say, oh, we did it a couple times, but you really need to commit to show that feedback loop going. So everyone's a little bit different. Yeah, Max, I'm curious to know, what about you with Local Voices Network?
Yeah, everything that Jen said, 100%. And we've been noticing that with more of the startup news organizations, the folks who are brand new, that this kind of community listening is being built into their DNA more and more, which is making it easier to start projects in newer places for us. Similarly, when we're working with new library systems or new city agencies, having one kind of champion who's going to be the main kind of project liaison, someone who's there to help organize, whether it's branch librarians who are hosting conversations or at a community organization running some of their programs, plus buy-in from folks who are their organizational leadership, helps make sure that a project can run long enough to be able to learn from and grow and iterate and change from, to make sure that it's still being useful for both the organization as well as for the community members who the organization is hoping to be able to convene and listen and learn with.
Cool. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Ulf? Do we have...
Yes, thank you. First, also from me, thanks to both of you for your insights. I understand that Harken is mostly used to optimize the newsroom and stories, so to say, so mostly the content side. But could you also give examples where it's used for transforming the product funnel in general, for instance, the app or newsletter?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we see tons of different uses. So even outside of journalism, we're working with the city of Chicago on their COVID response and on listening to youth and on engaging some of their stakeholders as well. But yeah, there's lots of different ways. Some partners have used it for general suggestions that people have about how the news organization can improve, and then also how the product can improve. So that might be a form you put, at the bottom of a page, or, an app that says, give us feedback. And then there's also ways of customizing it to allow people to categorize it. So it might be feedback on the look and feel, the usability, any sort of thing to make it just easier to start to see patterns on that end. But yeah, we use our own app internally as well to report questions and bugs and that kind of thing, and also just UX support. So that's a great question. There's tons of uses for the product, and the framework of just starting by asking and listening and then designing with, not for, is really flexible.
Thank you. And what about Max? Do you also have like an example?
Yeah, so we're working with the New York City Department of Health right now on a series of conversations. One thing that I can stress, I guess, is that we train folks, whether they're from community organizations, whether they're journalists, to facilitate conversations that are focused on local experiences. And so, being able to create a space for people where they feel comfortable and able to share what's been going on in their own life and in their own communities allows for folks who are looking at those stories to identify some of those themes and issues that are happening across communities. In New York City, where I live, for example, folks are dealing with issues around rent and eviction as we get to the end of our COVID-19 eviction moratorium. And so what people are dealing with in South Brooklyn is very different than what people are dealing with in the Bronx. But there are thematic overlays and connections about people's experiences and concerns and about what home and what their communities mean to them. And so for a city agency or for someone else who's looking at community health and public health, being able to understand how people think of both their relationship to their neighborhood, to their building, it helps understand how information can be spread within the community if there's a program or a project or initiative that folks are looking to work on. The Conversation Explorer and database, the Cortico tech stack, is just starting to be available for private companies who are looking to host conversations and to be able to hear from folks within their own organizations. But that's not something that we've fully built out yet as a service for folks.
I don't see any participant questions right now, so maybe I have one for you, Max. So you started out with real life conversations around that fabled, very nice wooden speaker, but naturally those aren't happening right now. Everything is digital, everything is virtual. Do you see trends that even when the last lockdown is lifted, trends in this virtual conversation that will last beyond COVID-19?
Absolutely. I think, and Jen, I'm so curious about what you've been noticing about this as well, but for whether it's universities that are thinking about digital and online education to folks in city agencies who realize that they're able to include so many more people in projects and in outreach. Did I freeze?
No?
No, we
Okay.
can still see
Okay.
you.
Guys, I saw you guys all froze for a second and I was like, oh no. But yeah, they're people are realizing that they can break apart their traditional ways of doing community outreach, a lot of post-it notes, a lot of in-person white paper, and are recognizing that other folks who were never able to attend those convenings in the first place have a space to be able to call in and connect digitally. And I think that being able to hold space for some of these difficult conversations online is a skill that and a valuable thing for whether it's a news organization or a city agency or a school or a library system to be able to make sure that everybody in your community can be able to chime in and participate and identify where there's gaps in services and programs and resources.
I would completely agree with that. I think what is being seen right now in a lot of the newsrooms we work with, and then just what society is calling for, are journalists to be facilitators and connectors versus just gatekeepers. And so having those skills of being able to, like Max said, enter those conversations, of knowing how to handle uncomfortable conversations and to be able to respond really to people's fair criticisms is hugely important and not something that people are used to having to do as part of their job as journalists necessarily. The other thing, and I'll just share screen one more time. I'm a visual thinker, so sorry. I'll just share right here is, it really matters too. We think a lot about what type of network are you serving? And so I think newsrooms have been used to seeing themselves as a centralized network where people go into that organization and, there's information in, information out. And I think seeing how many community information basically projects have jumped out and been created by people to fill in for some of the gaps that media isn't picking up right now actually helps news organizations see that they're part of a hub, that they are a node in a network instead of the hub of the network. And that thinking about who is part of your constellation of communication and what's the information ecosystem that you are part of, I think allows news organizations to create really powerful partnerships, collaborations, really just make more out of the content they're producing by seeing themselves in relation to others versus competing purely, just competing with other news organizations. So we're seeing a lot of exciting work happening with news organizations kind of rethinking of themselves in a decentralized manner, if that makes sense.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Jennifer, your slides with these metaphors of the megaphone and the news media on the mountain and the public as a group, and then the other one where everyone is connected via a spider web and equal, they remind me a lot of the discussion we had, in fact, more than 10 years ago or 15 years ago when the social web first came up, and that was how it was explained. And it seems you're still using these metaphors. Does that mean that publishers are still in the, what you call it, the extractive bucket?
Wow, that's a fair question. I think there's been so many changes in the world that all institutions, that uphold society are going through right now. And I think many of them are starting to see how being purely top down means that they get further and further away from the people whose experience they're trying to help serve. So I see that the further the distance is between the people making decisions and the people who those decisions affect, the worse the decisions usually are, because they're not informed by lived experience. And I think the web has done tremendous amounts to collapse that distance, because you don't need to physically be next to someone to know what their life is like. You can connect in all these different ways. And so I think news organizations are still have a long way to go to collapse that distance between decisions about what narratives to even be telling, what's important to people, and then what people actually are saying is important, and what they need is still pretty far apart for most organizations. So there's just a lot of opportunity there. And I mean, to be fair, I know in the US, I don't know exactly how the German market has been, but there have just been so many disruptions to the model and to what journalist jobs are, and they need to learn how to be a mobile journalist and do data journalism and do all these different things. So it's been a really tough time for everyone to just continuously evolve. It's really exhausting, and I think we're in a moment in the industry where people are rightfully kind of like suspicious of anything new, like, but we changed this, we changed that. But I think there's more work to be done, and we're seeing it because the public is demanding it. So,
okay, thanks, Jennifer. You have to unmute yourself. Jennifer, we can't hear you. Sorry, Jennifer, we can't hear you. You might have to, if it's something important organizationally, you might have to. Now we can.
I'm very sorry. Everything works really slowly at the moment here at VDZ. I'm truly sorry. So I think that's it for the moment, because we are almost done. Thank you very much, Jennifer and Max, for all your insights. And it was very nice having you here with us virtually. So that was very great. And yes, some organizational things are perhaps, Max, if you like, you can share your email address in the chat window as well, because that would be, I guess, a good idea. And I will make sure to summarize everything in the email for you and then email it to you, and also with the decks, if it's possible. Jennifer, you said that you will share the decks, and Max, if you like to, I will summarize everything, and then we will see each other on the 22nd of July. So that's almost a month, on the topic of newsletter strategies. Yes, if you have further questions, now is the time, and then the final word I will give to Ulrike.
Well, I don't see another question, but
no.
Then maybe I can ask one last one, because Jennifer, you're planning another audience engagement summit, and I know that I wasn't there, unfortunately, but I know that the first one was a big success. Maybe you can just briefly share what the biggest insights of that summit were.
That's great. I mean, so it's funny you say that, because we're looking to maybe have it in Europe instead, because COVID is not under control in our country. So to be determined. But what we learned, we intentionally brought people from adjacent industries in to teach journalists what they have learned about engagement and communities, essentially. So we had people come in from churches explaining what they've learned about engaging communities through their church, people from policy about how to do participatory budgeting, people from the medical field about how to better listen to patients in diagnosing disease. So we had lots of different folks show up who had insights that were relevant for journalists, but that we don't normally hear about in the trade publications. And so that was a really popular part of the summit that we would want to have back, which is what can we learn from other fields around how they're approaching engagement, and take those lessons.
Okay, thank you. Jennifer wants to have the last word, so I give it to you.
No, actually, that was meant for you. So, but that leaves me, for us, it's almost, yes, end of the day. So we all go home right now. And for you, you have a great day, I guess. I don't know, it's around midday at New York, probably Boston, wherever you are. Yes. And for Ulrike, the day just started. So a very good day for you all. And yes, for us, a nice evening here in Germany. It's sunny and summer is here already. Thank you so much.
Danke.
Thank you. Thank you, speakers.
Bye-bye,
Thank you,
everyone. Bye.
participants. Bye.
Cool. Thanks. See ya.
Thanks, Max. Thank you. It was great to have you.